Are we good to go? Are you good to go?
I am. I'm not sure. Is that
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
No, can you hear Oz at the back? Ed, can you say something, Ed?
Good afternoon.
Okay, so what we need is, because we haven't got a roving mic for questions, if anybody has got questions, I'm under a really bright spotlight now, are you? Wow. I can't see the audience at all. They've just disappeared. So just to say, could you kind of speak up louder? You know, like I do, the teacher voice. If you could do the teacher voice when you're asking questions, that would be amazing, because it's not picking it up on the sound, and it makes it a bit harder for you to pick it up and do the live captions. So you might get the odd typo, and then all will go into meltdown like I've been doing for everything else, all right? So thank you all very much indeed for coming back from lunch. I hope that was okay. Obviously, there was enough to feed the 5,000 as usual at these things. Aha, Yvonne, please do come in. Have a seat wherever you like. That's great. Welcome. It's Oz's wife, so we're pleased to have you join us here. And we've got the tablets again to pass around. Have we got the link on there, Luke, now? No, Luke. Okay, so we think we've got the link on those so that you can, when Oz gets to the relevant bit of his presentation, you can access that on each of those tablets, okay? So without further ado, on my wish list of things that I wanted to bring you for this event, getting hold of Oz and asking the bLack of Respect campaign to come and speak was pretty high up on that wish list. And thanks to Twitter, we got there, okay? So thank you very much for coming to speak, and there's your audience.
Hello, everybody. My name's Oz Eno. I'm an NHS GP in South London, where I was born, and I've been practicing medicine since 1989, and been a GP since 1998. I deal with real life, and that means real problems and real illnesses as they affect the diverse communities in London. I founded the bLack of Respect campaign, bLack, to bring to public consciousness and to address a glaring inequality that runs through not only my arena of work, the healthcare sector, but also the social care sector, the criminal justice system, education, the media, the art world, including books, television, film, and society generally throughout the UK, and indeed the parts of the world, including Europe and other parts of the world, that are influenced by the UK and US. So prevalent and insidious has it become, through repetition and habit, that many of the victims of this aren't even aware that they're victims. That inequality is the way people of African descent are referred to, primarily in comparison or in relation to Europeans, but also in comparison to other population groups, all of whom are accorded the respect of being described by heritage. We are described in colour terms, and as being the opposite, in quotes, of Europeans. Quite simply and simplistically, we are described, no matter what our actual complexion, as being black, while they, Europeans, are described, no matter what their actual complexion, as white. This is the hangover of the transatlantic slave trade, the European presence in Africa, especially South Africa, where the system of apartheid arose, the African presence in the Americas, especially Brazil and the United States and other parts of North America, and then attempts in the USA 50 years ago to restore parity and pride through claiming of the word black, the Black Power movement of the mid to late 1960s. Believe it or not, it has had far-reaching effects on self-esteem, life expectancy, and health. A major example of this, and the potential harm to health this can have, came in 2006 with the guidelines, the British guidelines, for the treatment of hypertension. And this was the final straw that galvanised me to launch the campaign. I felt there had to be a better way. The time was long overdue to restore true dignity to the African and his or her descendants across the world. The time had come for real change. bLack acquired its name in 2011, but the roots of it go much farther back, to the early 1990s. It was then that it first occurred to me that there was something wrong with the use of the word black to describe people of African descent. I was aware it had had a rebirth in the US in the mid to late 1960s, and I grew up in the 1970s and 80s, sharing the pride that came with the Black Power movement, which had got rid of Negro and coloured. But by the early 1990s, I was beginning to tire of the persistent use of this word on this side of the Atlantic, in general conversation, and in the news and newspapers, especially to describe Stephen Lawrence as the black teenager. Black was still in use in the UK, despite the fact that America, the birthplace of Black Power, had by 1989 finally and officially recognised that people of African descent there were as entitled as everybody else to be described by ancestral origin or heritage, hence the term African American that we hear today. It was also despite the fact that in South Africa the apartheid era was over. I felt that the UK was stuck in the past, was being left behind, and that black was an anachronism. I questioned the appropriateness of this in informal conversation with my family and friends. I asked, how can black people, or blacks, possibly be the primary respectable way to define us when there is so much more to us, such a richness of diversity, so much more to define us than the centuries-old European superficial visual notions of who or what we are, based on a monotone and negative view of our varied skin complexions. Most people agreed, but the habit of using black nevertheless persisted, although increasing numbers of people, myself included, were boycotting the Office of National Statistics ONS Ethnic Monitoring Questionnaire in its form then, and still do in its current form, because of its crude and inconsistent terminologies, as you will see here. As we got into the 2000s, the more I thought about the origins of the terminology of black and white to describe Africans and their descendants, and Europeans and theirs, and its persistent use, the clearer it became to me that though some might see it as just a harmless, cheap and convenient shorthand, it was in actual fact a sinister anachronism that has been, and still is, casually and lazily passed down the generations. The real game changer for me, the catalyst that brought this into sharp focus and convinced me that decisive action was necessary to raise awareness of the toxicity of this and to consign it to history, occurred in the course of my work as a doctor, a GP. Guidelines on the best treatment of high blood pressure were devised by the British Hypertension Society, BHS, and adopted by the National Institute for Care Excellence, NICE, for recommendation to the National Health Service, NHS, in 2006 to 2010. These were distributed to doctors across the UK in print and also online, which meant that they were accessible as a reference document to anyone, anywhere in the world with internet access. In them, it was recommended that a certain drug should be given to patients if they were black. This was known as the ABCD algorithm, which I'll show you now. So, no, that's not. There it is. As you will see, they attempt to define black, while simultaneously using heritage to describe everyone else, seemingly unaware of the discrepancy, the contrast. I challenged them on their guidelines and on how they define black, citing the fact that the genetics and mechanisms responsible for blood pressure control vary from region to region across the African continent alone, let alone in its diaspora, so that a one-treatment-fits-all policy cannot logically be applied to so-called black people. The BHS lead professor became defensive, but a professor from NICE at the time, Peter Littlejohns, intervened to say that I was right and that colour terminology to describe people was against NICE's own internal guidelines too. Since then, I've been taking the fight further afield. As for the guidelines, these were updated in 2011 and again in 2013, but black is still contained in the small print. To summarise, referring to people as black and white does 5 fundamental things. 1, it cheapens discussion on race, racism and the history of racism as applied to Europeans, Africans and their descendants anywhere in the world, reducing it to nothing other than colour of skin, while ignoring how this dehumanising system came about. In so doing, it perpetuates simplistic thinking, ignorance, and the very disrespect and racism that such discussions are supposed to overturn. 2, it creates a convenient false dichotomy between these 2 population groups, pitting them against each other as opposites. 3, it disproportionately disrespects people of African descent as not being worthy of being represented in the mind as sophisticated whole people, but merely a colour with a string of negative connotations attached to it, black. In so doing, it erodes pride in the minds of people of African descent, young and old, and replaces it with low self-esteem, as black power becomes an increasingly distant and tenuous justification for its ongoing usage in the UK. 5, from the medical perspective, it erodes or potentially erodes the mental and physical health and well-being of Africans and their diaspora, as the British Hypertension Guidelines of 2006-10 illustrate. In fact, I would add a 6th. Going by the numbers of Europeans and people of European descent who have signed the petition, it is clear that a significant number of them feel embarrassed or uncomfortable using the term black to describe people of African descent, and are offended, or at the very least, not entirely comfortable with being called white. It has to stop. Anyone of African descent is entitled to the dignity of being described by heritage. The generic word I use is Afroic, not black. Thus, for example, we have British Afroic people, not black British people, just as we have British Asians. As for the ONS template, here is a model I have devised to replace it with. A modern, sensible template, I think, for describing the ethnic diversity of the British Isles in a respectable and respectful way. Please take a few moments to look through it. Sorry?
North Africa.
So I can't quite hear your question.
I can't see North Africa, the whole of North Africa. It's Arabic.
Okay, well I've got that under Arab. I've got other population groups listed. We've not been able to put it on the slide here, but on my document, which is there, I've listed several other population groups, which I'll just list some of them. So I've had the next category is Asian, with Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Chinese, any other Asian background, please describe, and mixed Asian. And then I've had other ethnic group, which includes Arab, Berber, Turkish, Kurdish, Latino, Latina, and then another line, any other ethnic group, please describe. And then we've seen the mixed one, which was the previous slide here. The idea is that each group is described in heritage terms, not colour terms. If there's one missing, if you think North African should be specified, that's fine. But I'm just making the point. This is not about mixing out groups. It's about everybody being described as heritage, in heritage terms. And so, if I can just continue. As you'll see, heritage is used consistently throughout to describe people in this template that I suggest. There are no base notions of colour reserved for certain population groups or certain populations. Were the UK to adopt it, we might just find this model being copied around the globe. At least I hope so. Meanwhile, here's an illustration of what is wrong at present. Join the campaign and help effect positive and sustained change for a future of true equality. Don't just sign the petition. Please get others to do so and start using the new terminology. Above all, spread the word. Thank you.
Absolutely great, and apologies for the order of the slides. That was down to me. It's time for a few questions. Is that all right by you? Okay, Lila, I can see your hand up. Let's just see if anybody else has got any questions as well, so I know where to come to in the room.
Speak as loudly as you comfortably can.
So just as I know where else I might need to go to in the room, any other questions after Lila? Or we might rely on Lila to provoke the next question. So Eli's got a question as well.
Where can I sign?
Where can you sign? Okay, the petition. So there's a tablet out at reception with it on, and there are some tablets here passing around the audience that you can sign it there. Okay.
Sadly, I have to go.
Okay. Reception, Steve's got it on a tablet there, and we're passing some tablets round, so you could go through and do that as well. So, Eli, question from you first? Loud.
Loud? Okay.
Yeah, storytelling loud. I'll come to you in a moment, Lila. It's just we haven't had a question from Eli yet today.
Very interesting, very, very interesting. The fact that you've linked it to well-being and health is pretty powerful. How have you, when you have used this with your patients or people you're working with, have you seen any demonstrable effects in the way that they respond to you?
Yes, they've all responded positively. There's been no dissent when the term's being used, and I've usually said, I often use the term of African descent, and then I'll say, the term I use is Afroic as a condensed term for that. They immediately get it, of all population groups.
Okay. Lila?
Irina had a question.
Irina, then.
Yes. I was just wondering, I mean, I absolutely agree with you that we should not define ourselves by our colour. What I was wondering is, maybe I missed it in your presentation, have you consulted anyone else about defining these categories?
Yes, I have actually. In 2010 and 2011, I contacted the Office of National Statistics themselves. I was put in touch with a particular person there who was responsible for, her name was Helen Bray, she no longer works for the ONS, but she was responsible for producing the census for that year, for 2011. And again, she readily took the point, but then said they'd already published 37 million questionnaires for distribution around the UK at a cost of £3 million, and therefore it wasn't going to be financially justifiable to withdraw them and replace them.
I was just wondering, because you have Asian, Latina, Polish, which is a nationality, it's not ethnicity, Chinese, white, black.
Yes.
I was just wondering whether there is any way of maybe redefining these categories, because obviously not all Eastern Europeans like myself would define themselves as Polish.
These are simply examples, 6 faces for the homepage of the website.
I see.
Of course, there are several in Europe alone. But on the template, again, for technical reasons, they weren't able to put the full template that I proposed. But on the template, for European, what I've actually written as a suggestion for 21st century thinking is, and we're speaking about the UK here, English, Scottish, Welsh, Northern Irish, Cornish, Manx, Channel Islands, and then Anglo-Scottish, Anglo-Welsh, Anglo-Irish, or other mixed British. Some people, if they want to just use British, they can, so that category is there. Then Irish. There's not really any real reason why they need to be distinguished, but it's there, as it is currently. Any other European background, please describe. Mixed European. There are people of, maybe Anglo, Franco-Italian, Anglo-Greek, whatever they may be. So there's an opportunity to put that. Any European traveller group. I don't think gypsy is a particularly complimentary term for travelling groups. I think even the ONS can be credited for partly. But they still had gypsy in the 2011 census, gypsy and other and Irish traveller group. So, as I say, this is simply an illustration of the difference between heritage description of people and colour descriptions. That was the purpose of that.
Hi.
Hi.
Looking at this, I don't identify with any of these categories. I'm Arabic,
Yes.
and I noticed that you put Latina and Arabs in the same group. When you describe, you put Kurdish and Arabs all in the same group, and that's been my bugbear with any kind of forms that you complete, is Arab is always like other category, and actually the Arab world is the whole of North Africa, starting
Yes.
from Morocco, Algeria,
Yes.
Libya, Tunisia,
Absolutely.
Egypt, including the whole of the Middle East. We represent a substantial proportion of the population, and I think we need to be as a separate category, and that's me as an Arab of heritage.
Sure. Okay.
And we're not Latina, and we're not Kurdish, and we're not Persian.
Okay, right. The purpose of this listing is not to suggest that they're in the same group. I'm simply using heritage descriptions throughout. Can I just finish answering this lady's question? Okay. I'm simply tabulating populations by heritage, not colour. Yes, that's the whole purpose of this. Now, I take your point about Arabs not being, they're nowhere near Latin America or anything like that. If you wanted a heading separately, Arab, fine. That's not the point of this discussion. The point of this discussion is that we need to move away from having heritage descriptions for one group of people and ridiculous colour descriptions for another group. Specifically, Europeans and people of African descent, as though we're the opposite of each other, which we're not. We're simply from different population groups. So your issue about Arab, fine. I can put that as a I could easily have suggested putting that as a separate title. I've only got one sheet of A4 to fit all this on. So if I read on the list here, I think you've seen on there, I've talked about mixed heritage as well. That the current system, if I go back to the ONS template, has got white and black Caribbean, white and black African, white and Asian. I mean, these are just completely meaningless, archaic, racist terms. And that's what we want to move away from. I think this gentleman was next.
Hi, I have just a question regarding the guidelines that you spoke
Yes.
about. The disease coming from the guidelines, and regarding a bit the idea, like you said that, not before, there was something regarding the disease coming from labeling people and categorizing people as black people. My question is it just for the idea of categorizing people as African Asian was more linked to the social exclusion, like all the disease coming from social exclusion. Can we put everything together in the category of social exclusion?
Not really for this. I mean, certainly there is social exclusion occurring, in, if you like, in the practice of medicine. And there's also the mental health issue. I've alluded to that in the talk. But I was giving an example of some of the potential physically deleterious effects that can occur from clubbing everybody under one completely amorphous, homogeneous umbrella. East Africans, the gene controlling blood pressure, is known as the ACE gene, is completely different from that on the western side of the continent. Even within those regions, there will be differences. And we're in a world now, in an era where targeted medicine is supposed to be the way forward in all kinds of diseases. So this idea of just looking at somebody and saying, oh, they're black, let's give them a calcium antagonist as a first choice treatment for high blood pressure, is clumsy at the very least. So it's not just about social exclusion, it's about physical harm as well. I think this lady...
Just want to say thank you to participants over here who I think illustrate exactly your point, how passionately they feel about their identity with their heritage. So I think in a sense you're illustrating exactly the point that is being made here about how heritage is very important, and I think what you're trying to say is this is across the board. And
yes.
We just had a perfect illustration with our two contributors there.
That's right.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so the tablets are passing around, I think. In answer to your question about
kind of socioeconomic indicators, I think when Catherine presented the questionnaire this morning, we have taken up the recommendations from Professions for Good that came out of the Milburn Review, and at least in terms of people's kind of socioeconomic background, we're trying to capture that for the sector, because that was invisible before. And to be honest, when Milburn spoke recently to the committee, he said that FE was really bad in terms of social mobility. But actually the data that we're getting from our workforce is of the most amazingly social mobile workforce, you know, of people who have made it, moved out of the expectations for them in that way. And I think the kind of a whole point is that what we were talking about this morning is we can either carry on looking through the rearview mirror, but, you know, I think quite a few crashes happen because of that. And personally, when I drive, you know, I tend to look out the front mostly, okay? You know, maybe I've been doing it wrong. So I think that that's really important. But I think the other thing, the illustration that you've just highlighted, is very real. And I don't think for 1 minute Oz is saying we need to do this or this for this category. That, interestingly, is for all of us to do collectively. And I know, Catherine, can I just get you to share for 1 moment the Cornish story?
Want me to say, Katina? It's about that sense of seeing yourself, isn't there? And I have always had to put down white, and I have always had to put down. I don't mind putting down British, but I have always felt not that there's anything remotely wrong with being English, but I'm not English because I'm Cornish. And in 2014, when they granted that kind of ethnic minority status, people from Cornwall, me and all my brothers and sisters, well done now. It was a moment of complete celebration. Because you get seen, don't you?
And that's really powerful stuff. And Cornish people campaigned for years to get that. The two other groups that are currently campaigning really hard with ONS include people from South America, and so that will pick up some of the issues. The other thing is that lots of people do mix up things like nationality. The recommendations in terms of getting the best response from the question around people's heritage is to ask a question about nationality first, and then people can move past that. Am I being othered in terms of this country? We don't have a European monitoring form yet. Some people might argue that might have been a very helpful thing from the European Union to do, and it might help me make up my decision which way I might vote, maybe. But there is, you know, definitely something about that. Catherine and I have done a number of training sessions with people where this has been a really acutely felt thing, and it isn't only about heritage or ethnicity or race. We did a session with young women who worked in an office and they were in tears when we looked at the question around pregnancy and maternity. These were women who were just going about their daily lives. We do a training session on the questionnaire, and they were angry, and then they challenged us, why have you asked this question? And we said partly because it was a protected ground, and then they were upset, really upset. And a lot of, I have to say, women of perhaps my own generation assumed that was maybe because somebody had had a miscarriage, or no, that wasn't what it was about. They were frightened in their workplace to be seen as potentially childbearing because they might not get a full-term contract, they might not get a permanent job, they might not be given a promotion. Same issue, different one. And we had another colleague sat beside us in that particular session who was somebody we'd both known for a long time, who'd done work around equalities, and in fact Margaret will know very well as well. And I turned around and he was really choked up and upset as well, and I really thought this was the time to abandon the questionnaire stuff. And we said, okay, what have we said now? And he said it was the first time in 65 years he'd been able to declare himself or identify himself on a form as a Sikh and an atheist. And I think that's the message that we're all trying to give here. And I think that's the message to our sector. Our sector is one of the sectors, like health, that when there is a change in our society, because of the social mobility in it, it hits us really early. And so we should grab that as an opportunity. We should look through that front window and stop looking for the car crash that's coming behind us. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Oz. That's brilliant.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Now for a moment, so fidget in your seats or whatever, that's wonderful. Don't forget tablets passing around, make sure you sign. And Yvonne, you've left some publications at the desk, haven't you? Yes.